So this session is now being recorded. Anything you share in the chat or on screen video or through your microphone could be viewable or part of the recording for anyone else here in the Purdue Global community. So please keep that in mind as you interact and engage with one another today. So today I'm going to talk about the science of learning. Oops, let me make sure my slides are advancing here. So not a lot of objectives today. We want to dive in and explore a little bit of the science behind learning, and then we'll focus on some tips and strategies we can use to learn new things and to improve our academic performance. If you have any questions as we're going along, please feel welcome to type them into the chat. I'll try to keep an eye over there, but then I'll also leave some time at the end for questions as well. So anything I've missed in the chat, hopefully I can see it then. And then you're welcome, of course, to hop on your microphones at that point as well. All right, so let's dive in. The big question is, how do we learn new things? So I want to challenge each of you to think for a minute, if you can, back to the last time you learned something new. Try to think about what it was. What was this new thing you learned, and what did you do to learn that new thing? I wonder if anyone would be willing to share an example. If you want to type in the chat, or if anyone would like to pop on their microphone and share how they learned something recently. What was something you learned recently? Oh, Nikki's trying to learn Italian. All right, learning a new language can be tough, I think, but it's a fun challenge. It's something you can put into action right away. What are the strategies you're trying to use, Nikki? Are you using an app or studying from a book? Nikki says she's using an app and she hasn't retained anything. That's good to know. That's good to know. I was thinking about this as well, trying to think about what was something that I learned recently. And this is kind of a silly example, but I learned something recently sort of by association. My husband is an online student and he's currently in a finance class. And he was trying to come up with that's an accounting term, GAAP, and what it stands for. And he asked me if I knew, and I, of course, did not. And so we were looking back in his textbook together, trying to find, like, what was GAAP? What did that stand for? And so we found it again. General accepted accounting principles. And then he was studying the next day and he was like working on a paper and he calls out, what was that thing that GAAP stood for? And I was like, general accounting. And I couldn't quite remember the whole thing. And he was like, practices. And I was like, is it practices, principles? So we had to look it up again and see what it is. And then he puts it into the paper. And then again, later, like this same week, he's working on revising the paper, adding something else into it again. And he was like, what was that I was trying to remember? And then by that time, even before he had finished searching for it again, it came back to him, that seeing it again and again. So I felt like that was kind of a recent example, because in the process, I ended up learning it as well, kind of just by association of him doing his studying around where I am. So yeah, Nikki, I think repetition is really key. Melissa says she learned how to pair 12 concepts in helping teach autistic children to 12 lessons in sports, in particular golf and equine therapy. Very interesting, Melissa. How did you go about learning how to pair those 12 concepts with 12 lessons? How did you learn that?
The Ellis Foundation.
Okay, so that's where you learned it from. I want to know, what was your learning process? How did you get that new piece of information and knowledge into your brain?
I watched it.
Okay, good. So some
And then
visual learning, watching a video.
Demonstrated.
That's awesome. Yeah. So Nikki talks about repetition using an app. Melissa brought up watching videos, being like learning that visually. Catherine says she's a visual learner as well. I think recognizing what our learning styles are can be really helpful for learning. So in order to think about how learning happens, I want to imagine for a bit that we're going on a little adventure into the woods. And so imagine, if you will, a very dense woods, right? There's trees, there's ferns, undergrowth, upper growth, vines growing everywhere, and there's no real way through anywhere. We don't know. We, get out the machete, we'd be trying to clear a path. There's no real clear path between where we are now and maybe where we want to be, where we've got maybe a campsite over here and we want to get there, but there's no path there. This is what our brains are like before we've learned a new concept, right? There's nothing there yet. It's just our dense brain. We can think of it as like a forest. There's no path yet. And when we're learning things, we want to create those paths, those connections between our neurons, between our brain cells. Those, we might think of them as neural pathways. And so we can think of that like a woods. Imagine then that in this woods, you come across something that's really in the way, like a gap here. And so in this case, we've got woods on both sides, and then you come up to this speedy river. There's no easy way across. This is that to represent that synapse or the gap. And so when we make connections between two different neurons or between point A and point B, we want to bridge that gap or bridge that synapse. And so when we make that connection across, we've learned something. And so like we talked about with repetition, once we do that path again and again and again, pretty soon we'll have worn a little spot through the woods. And so it gets easier and easier to find our way through the woods and to figure out where to get where we're going, because we're establishing a path. In fact, we might even build a bridge right over that river. That synapse becomes connected more solidly. It's not something we're trying to remember again. How did I learn this? Or what was it? I remember the GAA, but what did the P stand for? Pretty soon we'll have that bridge, that solid structure over the synapse where we can continue to use that learning. And our pathway through the woods can become wider and more solid the more and more we repeat and go over that path and reinforce what we're learning again and again, so that pretty soon it's really solid in there and we have a really solid understanding of this new concept. I will say, though, before we move on, that I think this metaphor works nicely to think about learning. But I also want to mention that, like a trail in the woods, it can grow back over itself. That overgrowth is going to come back in. We'll see the weeds working their way onto the trail. And that's what happens kind of like when we're forgetting. And so we might do a lot of these strategies to learn a concept and build a really good path, even like a 2-track road through that woods. We know this concept. But then if we don't use it for a long time, we don't think about it, pretty soon that path will start to grow over again. And it might be easier to go in and find it again and knock those weeds away and remember what we've learned with a little bit of review. But we do want to, in order to maintain that path, keep using that knowledge and information we're learning. So today I really want to focus on 6 different strategies we can use based on this science behind learning to learn new material better and to improve our academic performance. So 6 strategies: spaced practice, interleaving, retrieval practice, elaboration, concrete examples, and dual coding. So let's dig in to the first one, spaced practice. So spaced practice is when we're spacing out our learning over different times. So you might think of this as when you're walking through the woods, instead of just pacing back and forth over that trail again and again and again, you're going to go out one day on the trail. Maybe it's kind of weedy and you're going to work your way through there and maybe cut some branches out of the way and figure out Then the next day, you'll come back. You've got fresh new cobwebs up there in the morning. The rain's gotten on them. You've got to brush those out of the way. Maybe you clear a little bit more and you do that path again. Maybe then you're not there for a day. By the time you come out the next day, a branch has fallen over. You've got to get that branch moved off the trail so you can get through there. You're spacing out those walks down the path, if you will. And so what the science teaches us is that spacing out our learning increases our brain's storage strength. So that same amount of time that we spend, maybe it's an hour spaced out over 4 15-minute sessions, is going to have greater retention in our minds than focusing on that same information for just an hour straight in a single session. So look for ways to space out your study sessions and space out that time that you're practicing things. If you're learning a new concept, return to it. Take a look at it in the morning. Come out again and take another look at it in the evening before you go to bed. The next day, look at it again. Take the weekend away and come back to it again on Monday so that you're spacing out those times. Set aside some time to review information from your courses from previous units. In that way, you're also spacing out your practice. So that material you worked so hard on back in Unit 1 to start making that path, you don't want it to grow over just because you've moved on to Unit 2 or Unit 3. So you want to come back and review that and keep that path going so that you have that information and you can apply it as you continue through the course, and also so that it's easier to have in your memory and remember it. Maybe down the road, you're going to take another class that builds on this foundation. And so you want to be able to still have that pathway there and have that learning in there and not forget everything that you've learned. Try to review the same information in each space session. Instead of studying different material each time, we want to space out our study sessions definitely to improve our focus. But when you're really trying to learn something new, instead of coming in each of maybe those 15-minute sessions with something new, okay, this first 15 minutes, I'm going to study that, and then I'm going to study this, that's a different strategy. For spaced practice, we're really thinking about reviewing that same information, but spacing out those review sessions over time so that we're giving the trail a little bit of a chance to grow over, and we're giving our brain a little bit of time to seemingly forget something so that we can come back and retrieve it again and build up that brain storage strength. Next is the process of interleaving. Interleaving means that we're mixing together different problems throughout our study session. So doing different like problem types. Maybe you're in a math class and you've got some that are, some story problems to do. Maybe you've got some things that are built around division, some things built around multiplication, mixing up those different types of problems, different ideas that you're studying, different types of problems. This will allow you to improve your knowledge of being able to understand which type of problem or which concept might apply best to a given situation. So, again, back to that math example, if you sit down and you do all of these multiplication problems in one sitting, you're going to have a really good grasp of multiplication. But then when you're faced with something that maybe needs a little bit of division work, you're not sure how to do it because you've only been focusing on this multiplication. If you're mixing it up so that you're doing one multiplication, one division, one addition, mixing all of these different things together, it's going to help your brain be able to differentiate between these different types of problems or methods so that you can choose the best one for any situation. This strategy of interleaving enhances our learning because it allows our brains to make comparisons between these different examples and these different categories. And our brains want to be making those comparisons, looking at things that are similar or different. And so interleaving is a really great way to get that part of our brain really stimulated. A couple tips for applying this are to mix different types of questions or problems throughout your study session. So you're doing different types of things during maybe that block of time when you're sitting down to work. Practice problems after retrieval practice. So quiz yourself on concepts and then apply the concepts. So in this, there's both some retrieval practice and some practice problems. So first, quiz yourself, right? So you might think of this as first asking yourself, okay, what is the square root of 9, right? And so you give yourself a quiz and then go ahead and apply those concepts by working on some practice problems that use those square roots, so that you're quizzing yourself and then you're applying that as you interleave these different types of problems. Our third strategy is retrieval practice. So retrieval practice is just practicing remembering, bringing something back up. So this improves our memory of tested information. So when the learning scientists are looking at this kind of thing, what they see is that students who are preparing for a test actually learn the material a little better. Those tests aren't just something to necessarily assess what they've learned, but they also help the students learn. And so we can do that for ourselves when we're learning something as well, trying to retrieve something, testing ourselves on it to help strengthen that knowledge. This works because it strengthens the memory by pulling it out of the head. Instead of trying to cram all this information in, we're pausing and trying to retrieve something that's already there. So some ways that you can do this in your study sessions are try putting away all of your course materials and writing out everything you know about the topic. So, go into your unit, do your reading, work your way through, take some notes as you go, whatever your method is, and then put all that away and just try to remember. Write down everything you remember about what you've just learned. That's a really great way to stimulate that retrieval practice. Try doing some practice tests. We were talking a little bit about apps earlier. There's some great apps out there like Quizlet or Kahoot. You can create your own little quizzes or practice tests. And you can also find a lot that are already made by others. So if there might be, concepts you're studying that are you're not the first person to study them, right? So take a look on there, see if there's something already made. If there isn't something that directly suits you, build your own quiz, use information that you're learning to create your own practice tests. Flashcards can work well too. If you don't want to get into an app, just get some little note cards. I like to use note cards a lot when I'm learning, trying to memorize certain terms. It's just something I think I started doing back when I was in high school using flashcards, and I've just kind of stuck with it, where I might write a word on one side of the flashcard, flip it over, and I've got the definition for that word. I remember when I was studying for comprehensive exams in graduate school, I had a lot that like one side of the card would have maybe the name of a British king, and then I would flip it over and I would have the dates that they ruled, important dates of things that happened during their reign. And so I could look at that name and be like, okay, King James, and then try to remember everything I know about him, all of those dates. And then I can flip it over to check myself and make sure that I've got it right. So I think flashcards work really well, but there's a lot of apps that can kind of mimic that as well, like Quizlet. Try to make a concept map from memory. So instead of looking at the concept, try reading about it, studying about it, and then again, putting that away. And from memory, trying to draw out how that concept looks, making your own sort of visual or concept map. If we were drawing a concept map of learning, right, we might have like a little dot over here for one neuron and a little dot over here for another neuron. And then we've got this gap in between that's our synapse. And so then we might draw a bridge that goes over from one to the other to represent that learning is making that connection between those neurons and then creating that strong neural pathway. So trying to learn something and then creating that concept map from memory can be a really great way to practice that retrieval. Elaboration. So this is the process of connecting new information to things we already know. We could also think of this as adding features to an existing memory. So let's go back to that forest trail, right? When we're first going through, maybe it's just a little bit of a footpath. We've knocked down some grass, but we're going to add features out as we learn more. Maybe we're going to put in a trail marker that marks the mile. This is 1 mile. This is 2 miles. Maybe we're going to put in some arrows showing which way to go. We're going to build a bridge over that river and reinforce it with some sturdy logs and some cables. Maybe we'll add some features to that memory. Maybe out here along the trail, we want to create a little place to stop, and we end up building a little bench here and a little spot to just stop and enjoy the birds in the woods. So thinking about elaborating on what we know. So building in those features to what we've already learned. So elaboration, this idea of connecting and then integrating new information with existing concepts actually increases the organization of ideas in our mind. So this can lead to better retrieval, facilitating retrieval. And so you might think about this a little bit as your brain having this various information. And when you elaborate and you start to connect those things you already know, it's sort of like you're sorting out that information. You're making little file folders for yourself in your brain, connecting things back to it. Things you already know from your experiences that you're now connecting to new concepts that you're learning. All of this is that process of elaboration. It's going to increase that organization of ideas. And help us be able to retrieve things better. So some things you can do to elaborate are pausing and asking yourself how and why questions about what you are learning, instead of thinking just necessarily like, okay, A works because of B, asking yourself how does A work? Why does B influence A in that way? Really, those open-ended sort of questions of how and why, really unpacking, that helps your brain make those connections and elaborate on your knowledge. Try explaining concepts to yourself or others while you're learning. For example, just saying the steps out loud. First I divide by 3, then I carry the 1, then I do what's in parentheses, whatever your steps are. But try saying those steps out loud, or explaining a concept to yourself or to someone else. Maybe if you've learned something that day, it's helpful, when you get home around the dinner table, to share what you've learned with your family. I think especially for students, it can be difficult to set some boundaries and to figure out how to integrate your schoolwork in with all of these other things, including your family life. And sometimes I think the evenings can be tough because you want to have that time with your family, but you also know you're going to need to step away and spend a couple hours maybe doing some coursework. And so looking at some of those ways to bring that learning back to your family can be a really good way to help you establish and reinforce those boundaries and get them on your side, so that they know that you're learning a lot, and that's why you have to step away and take a couple hours for yourself instead of playing some games with them and something like that in the evening. Instead, you instead need to focus on your studies. So at the dinner table, those might be nice times to tell your family what you've learned, explaining some concepts to them. And as you're doing that, you'll also be reinforcing it in your mind, you're repeating it, and you're elaborating on it. Maybe even in the process of talking to it about it with your family, you end up making some connections to things your family already relates to. And in that way, you've elaborated on this concept. You've better organized some of that information in your mind. Another tip here to use this strategy is to provide some self-explanations during a problem-solving task. So as you're working through a difficult task, solving this problem, talk to yourself about it. Give yourself some self-explanations. Why are you doing it like this? What are the steps that you're following? Think about this almost as while you're working through a problem, you're teaching someone else how to do it right along with you. You're kind of showing them what to do and explaining your actions as you do them. These are all really nice ways to elaborate on our learning and reinforce our learning. All right, number 5, concrete examples. So whenever we're learning something new, even abstract ideas, it's very helpful to come up with some concrete examples that we can really wrap our brains around if you want to think about that. Like identifying a concrete example for these conceptual ideas, it makes it easier for us to understand the idea, first of all, and also to remember it. A lot of times you might find that you can remember an example better than you can the actual concept. But then when you recall that example, the example also shows you the concept. And so you can remember the example and then think about the example and then remember the concept that's behind it. So more concrete and imaginable information increases learning associations, even when we apply it to a really abstract course concept or to course content that's very abstract or conceptual, coming up with those concrete examples. So I encourage you to identify multiple examples for a new concept. Look out for examples that your instructors share or that a tutor shares, and add those to your arsenal of your collection of examples so that you have multiple examples to help explain a new concept. That's going to give you that material that you'll be able to associate better and remember in your mind, but also building on what we just talked about, having those multiple examples can also be a nice way to elaborate on our learning. So this little tip can kind of be nice for both. Once you have multiple examples, try explaining how 2 or more examples are different or how they're similar, finding things that differentiate them or that bring unity to them with these examples can help to really make sense of these concepts. And also try to create fun examples or even jokes if you can. It just turns out we remember stuff that's fun and funny a little bit better than we do really dry examples. And so try to come up with things that are fun. Again, look for any examples that maybe your professors share. You might also look online for some examples for some things like this. Maybe some jokes that are out there about a concept you're trying to learn, and then you'll be able to remember it a little better and learn it because you've got this example that now or joke that you've been able to memorize. Number 6 is dual coding. So dual coding is when we have multiple representations of the same thing. So for example, like a visual representation of something in addition to that textual representation. So what the science tells us is that multiple representations of the same information enhances our memory and our learning. Using these kinds of visuals decreases conceptual errors. We typically remember pictures better than words, right? So sometimes it can be helpful rather than trying to memorize a definition of a concept or a process and all of those steps. Instead of trying to memorize that, it might be easier just to memorize a picture or a visual and get that idea in your head. And then you can recall that visual, recall the picture, and then start to fill in those pieces of the concept so that you're enhancing your memory. You've both maybe read something in the textbook, you've listened to your professor talk about it in seminar, you've studied it using a visual, and so you're doing all of these different codes for the same information, and that dual coding then can help you remember it and enhance that memory and make sure you've learned it. Some tips here are to use images that are clear and unambiguous. Because you're using this image to stand in for a concept, you want to make sure it's really clear and that the meaning is not ambiguous at all, so that when you're just remembering this visual, it really does work to help you remember the concept. If you have things in the visual that maybe could go in two different directions or be interpreted in a couple different ways, that could be problematic, especially maybe if you're thinking about being in a testing environment and you study this visual and there's something that's kind of open for interpretation, and you've really focused on trying to learn it, but then in that testing situation, under pressure, you're feeling some anxiety, and then you can't remember which way you were supposed to interpret it. And so try to make sure you've got visuals that are really clear and that don't leave themselves open for too much, so that they really work well when you're trying to recall that information. Try to generate your own images. This, again, instead of finding things that are already made, create your own, draw out a concept. This is going to enhance those benefits even more. Now you're going through the process of creating this visual yourself. You're applying that concept to the page and something that's going to be meaningful to you. And it's better than anyone else's visual because it's a visual that you've created yourself. I do a webinar on discussion board secrets at the start of each new term. And one of the things I share there is a visual one of the peer tutors created for a communications class. They were studying a communications concept, and she was just having a tough time remembering and making sense of this concept. So she drew her own visual of this kind of concept map of sort of how this process would work. And it worked really well for her to learn it. And then it also gave her something she was able to share in the discussion board for that class, so that other students could benefit from that visual. And also she could show the professor something she was doing that was really creative and really focused on trying to learn this information and put it in a way that she could understand. So look for ways to make your own images, your own graphics and things like that. So, all right, those were our 6 learning strategies, but I've got a learning bonus for you here. Feedback. Feedback is a really important way that we learn. It improves our learning by showing us what we know and what we don't, right? If we go in, we do a quiz, we take a test, we write a paper or something like that, we get feedback on it, we're going to see, here's what we did well. We mastered that. We know how to apply that APA style to our title page, right? We did A-okay on that. But what we didn't do, our in-text citations were not fully complete. We left off that location for direct quotes or something like that. So it helps us identify what we already know and what we don't know, so that then we can also focus our learning and figure out what we need to keep studying to learn better. Feedback increases our metacognition. Metacognition means our understanding of our own learning processes. So by getting this feedback back on what we've done, we can start to recognize that, okay, I used this study method for hours and I still did not get this right on the test. That lets us know that our learning process wasn't working for us for that. We need to find something different. Okay, so maybe we used a bunch of flashcards and we were trying to memorize them, and then it just didn't work. So we know, okay, next time I'm going to try something that's not flashcards. And next time I'm going to try making a concept map. I'm going to try drawing a visual. Or maybe you really made some great visuals one time for this concept, but then it just didn't stick with you and it didn't work well and help you learn it. And so then okay, next time I'm going to try to do some of those flashcards, or I'm going to do some Quizlet quizzes to just make sure I've really got this information in. So we want to find those ways to increase our metacognition. When we can understand how we learn best, we can use that to our advantage, so that no matter how the information is presented to us in a course, we can shape that information in a way that helps us learn it the best. So some tips here for making the most of feedback: to read instructor feedback as soon as it is available. You don't want to be waiting weeks and weeks and then going back and looking at your feedback. As soon as you can, get in there and see what the the professor gave for feedback. Reach out if you have any questions about it and start thinking about how you can then apply that feedback. That's why we want to look right away so that we can start applying that feedback in our very next assignment. Don't just read the feedback, but take some time to reflect on it, to try to identify some opportunities for growth. What can you do better with your study time to maybe learn some concepts better the next time? How could you plan out your study session so that you have enough time to do the research for this paper, to draft the paper, and then also to take the time you need to edit it and make sure that it's professional and on point and complete and ready to submit. So there's always opportunities for growth. And so taking some time to reflect on that feedback and thinking about how you can apply it, how you can take advantage of some opportunities to grow your learning even more will really help you make the most of that feedback. I also would encourage you to seek out feedback from a variety of sources. You know that in any courses, your instructors are going to give you feedback, but there's also other ways to get feedback. You might ask a tutor. You could even ask people that you know, your family, friends, people that you work with, trying to get some feedback from them on what you've done. See if, maybe your husband will read your paper for you before you submit it. And then you can ask, as someone who is outside of this course, did you feel like it was clear to you, or do I need to explain this a little bit more? So seeking out that feedback from a variety of sources can be really helpful. I actually had an interesting experience with this. I was teaching a writing class with a graduate TA. And I noticed that as we were both giving students feedback on often the same, drafts and things like that, but we were both giving feedback, that my feedback really focused a lot more on, I would say, form. I was looking for clarity and being concise. I came into English and teaching English really from a journalism route. I started in the newspaper industry. And so I think that journalism focus really comes in still to my feedback, that I really am focused on writing, that I want it to be clear and concise and just make that point, as sort of simply and straightforward as it can. But my TA was very much a creative writer, wrote a lot of fiction, and so was all about unpacking a lot of details and sensory details and descriptive language. And what I saw that term with both of those sets of feedback were that students really were able to develop writing that was both concise and clear and straightforward, but also was very engaging and developed with specific examples full of detailed descriptions of things, some of those sensory details. And so students really benefited in that situation from having feedback from two of us in the same course that gave them different things that they could apply to their writing. And certainly in that situation, I think some students maybe gravitated more towards one set of feedback and others gravitated maybe more towards a different set of feedback. And so getting that feedback from a variety of sources will not only give you more feedback that you can use to help better understand the way you're learning and increasing that metacognition, better identifying opportunities for growth. And it'll also help you learn strategies for sifting through that feedback. Remember, ultimately, if you're writing a paper, you might get feedback from 5 different people, but ultimately it's your paper. And so whatever feedback you decide to apply, or someone might make a suggestion that, hey, I think it'd be really good if you did this right here, and you just decide you don't want to, that's fine. And you might see then that as you have a variety of feedback, that you've got other people giving you feedback that agree with your approach. And so look for opportunities to get feedback from a lot of sources. Remember that, for example, with papers or projects that you're working on for your classes, you can submit them to the Academic Success Center first to get feedback from a tutor before you get feedback from an instructor. So right here, even just at Purdue Global, we've got 2 great sources of feedback for you just in terms of your course and the Academic Success Center. So from there, asking a friend or colleague or family member can just add to that. So, a couple of tips for success I want to review. Devote your attention efficiently and mindfully. Focus on one task at a time. I know we live in a world where multitasking almost seems like we have to do it, and it can be really tough. I know for me, I can struggle with that as well. I'm trying to get more in the habit of using like focus settings on my calendars and on my computers so that I just am not getting distracted by new emails popping in or a chat message popping in or things like that, just because it disrupts my focus. And I know that if I'm really needing to focus in on a task or a project, I need to block all that other stuff out. It means I'm just focusing on maybe getting something written, and I'm not writing this while I'm also playing a video over here. And I'm also just trying to organize some papers down here in the process. That's too many things, right? In order to be efficient and mindful, stay focused on just one thing. As you're studying, challenge yourself to think deeply about the material. Push yourself beyond just what's on the page. Again, going back to those how and why questions, really thinking deeply about it and not just trying to skim the surface and find that definition of, this means X, but instead, why? Why does this mean X? How does this end up here? Really thinking deeply about what you're learning. Work to organize the information you're trying to learn. Try to identify models, for example, and patterns in what you're learning. And you might experiment intentionally. Try thinking like an expert. For example, how does my professor think about this problem? How would a scientist approach this situation? What would a mathematician do if they were faced with this kind of challenge? Try to think like an expert, putting yourself in those shoes. What would a biologist do if they were in the woods right now, looking at these leaves? How would they figure out what diseases might be impacting the plant or something like that? And then you're thinking like an expert, and you're able to then apply that to what you're learning, and also start thinking like an expert yourself. Try to elaborate on what you're learning and connect it to what you already know. For example, create some examples that illustrate course concepts. This is really important. I think, right, we know here at Purdue Global, our students are working adults. You come to the classroom with so many experiences and so much knowledge already. And so a lot of what you're doing here is making connections between some of these new things that you're learning to what you already know. And so think to your experiences. Think if there's examples of things that can illustrate a concept you're learning. You might have done something in the workplace time and time again without necessarily knowing this theory or concept behind it. Once you take this class, all of a sudden now you have this theory, this concept that kind of informs this task that you do regularly at work. Well, now all of a sudden that task can become an example, and it can illustrate for you how to do that concept. And so you're using something you already know to help you understand a new concept even better. A couple more here. Try mixing up your study location, the time, the situation, the modality. So study in different places, study at different times of day. Try getting up in the morning a little extra early to review something, and then take a little bit on your lunch break to review it again, studying at those different times, studying in different places. Try studying in different situations. So maybe sometimes you maybe have some study sessions you set up, maybe use Google Meet to meet with a classmate or a couple classmates in a small group to study something together. Take some time to study on your own. Maybe you have a situation at home where you've got kids in school and you all decide you're going to study together. You're all studying different things, but you've got this situation where you're all gathered around the table, all working on your coursework at the same time. Try those different situations. Different modalities. Study with visual aids. Try listening to a podcast, watch a video, read a text. Get that information in different modes so that your brain has different ways of processing it and comprehending it so that you can learn the material even better. Once again, we come back to spacing these study sessions out over time and then interleaving concepts or problems throughout that time. So in this case, I've got two kind of concepts together. So you might think about this. We talked about space study sessions where you're repeating the same information again. Let's say in one space study session, you're going to do 2 multiplication problems, 2 division problems, and 2 addition problems, right? And then later, you're going to have another 15-minute session, do those same types of problems again. Hit the multiplication, hit the division, whatever the case might be, so that you're interleaving those problems, but you're also spacing it out so that you're having small interleaving sessions spaced out throughout the day and the week and the month. Create a drawing of the concept you're learning. Make charts to try to organize information. That is going to also help your brain with that organization. Try sketching out a process, the way something works. Make a mind map of concepts and their relationships so that you can see how they're mapped together with one concept over here. This connects in this way over to this other concept, and that's going to connect down here. In writing a lot, we think about that triangle. We've got the purpose of the writing, the audience of the writing, and then the message. And so thinking about the way those different concepts work together, that who we're writing for impacts the purpose of our writing, and the purpose of our writing impacts the message, and the message that we're sharing might be a little different based on our audience. And so that mind map can kind of connect different concepts together. And then finally, prepare for your future study and practice sessions by putting information into a learnable form. So try putting your notes into a format that helps with problem sets, or that helps you prepare for an exam, or setting out notes in a way that just enables retrieval practice, like maybe using those flashcards, for instance, or maybe it's helpful. You might do some notes where you do some blocking. So you've got like a line, like the name of a theory, and then underneath it, you've got the important characteristics of that theory. And so then you can put a piece of paper over the rest of it, and you can just see the theory, and you can kind of work your way down through those notes, kind of blocking it off, right? So you can kind of be like, okay, here's what I know about this theory, and then move that out of the way and say, oh, okay, I did it. I just, at this 5th point, I'm going to try to remember too, and then retrieve that again a couple times. So thinking about some ways to prepare your materials and your notes so that you can study from them even better the next time you're setting yourself up for success. My final tip is to use your resources. Remember that you don't have to find your way through this woods on your own. You don't have to be out there bushwhacking with that machete, trying to find a path through the woods all by yourself. You're part of a university community and a learning community, and there are a lot of support systems here in place. I've got a couple here. Remember, your instructors, reach out to your instructors with questions. Ask them for examples, for instance, things like that. Use the librarians. Librarians can be very helpful. They can help point us to the information we need, maybe to a library guide. So take advantage of that. And then also take advantage of tutors. Here at Purdue Global, we have both professional and peer tutors. Take advantage of that tutoring. All of these resources, your instructors, your librarians, your tutors, all of these are free resources for you. There's no charge to use them. There's no limit on how many questions you can ask an instructor or how many times you can visit a tutor. So take advantage of these resources. And we have a note here from Catherine saying she's always excited to help. And I think that's so true of so many professors here at Purdue Global, that we are here to help, and we want you to learn these new concepts and to do it with ease as much as possible. Learning isn't always easy, but we want to try to support that learning and help out. So reach out to your instructors. I wanted to spotlight here the Academic Success Center. The Academic Success Center here at Purdue Global is the home to 6 different centers. Learning for Success Center, that's what I'm representing today. I'm the team lead in Learning for Success. This is the center that is sort of, think of it as your first stop. If you don't know where to go, you're new at Purdue Global, or you're just not sure who to ask, start with Learning for Success. You're going to find more information like what I talked about here today in that center. You'll find things like study skills, reading comprehension, ways to improve your reading, ways to better manage your time and set up a weekly plan for success, things like that. Time management, study skills. I think I hit on a lot of those kinds of things that aren't necessarily within the field of a specific class. Those kinds of things really are Learning for Success. The Learning for Success Center is also unique because it's staffed with peer tutors. So these are students here at Purdue Global, just like you. They've been here for a while, long enough to demonstrate that they're successful. And now they're willing to share some of those strategies with you. So Learning for Success is a great way to meet with a peer tutor and come up with a time management plan, with a study plan, maybe set up a time plan for working through a big project that's going to take you a couple weeks. The Academic Success Center is also home to the Writing Center, Math Center, Science Center, Business Center, and Technology Center. All 5 of those centers are staffed with professional tutors. These are folks who all have advanced degrees in their field, master's degrees, doctorate degrees in business and math, science. And so these are professional tutors that are going to be able to really help you with difficult concepts, things that you're learning in your class that you really need some help understanding these concepts better. These tutors are great. And so I've put on this slide, the centers, this link would take you to all of the tutors and then also peer tutoring, which is unique to Learning for Success. And so all of these links, so you can see kind of what we offer. In addition to tutoring, there's also a variety of resources at the Academic Success Center. So even if you're not dropping in to meet with a tutor, you can also find a lot of just helpful resources there, things to help you understand some concepts, some of those maybe examples or graphics and visuals to help you maybe learn how a cell works or something like that. So be sure to take advantage of those. I also want to highlight PG 411. So this is the home to the Academic Success Center in Brightspace. And I'm going to put a couple of links into the chat. The first one is for the Learning for Success Center. Like I said, that's where I'm from, and that's where I recommend your first stop. And I do want to mention that the Learning for Success Center is open right now. So after this session, if you want to pop in and meet with a peer tutor and work through something with them, do it. They're there right now, and they're happy to help. The second link in there is to self-enroll in PG 411. This is free. You only have to self-enroll once, and then you'll have access to this space the rest of the time you're a student here. This is just another home for the Academic Success Center, and it's the space where we do all of our paper reviews for writing, and we do project reviews for math and science all through PG 411. So in order to take advantage of this great resource, you just have to do this quick little self-enrollment step, and then after that, you'll have access to this space. And then within that, you can connect to all of our resources right there from a spot in Brightspace next to your other classes, which can be really helpful. And then these are the references I use. So I just want to pause here. We've got a couple minutes before 1 to see if there's any questions, anything else I can do to help today. Oh, you're welcome, Nikki. Thank you for coming. I'll stop sharing that. Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you all. I'm so glad that this was helpful for you. I hope it gave you some great tips and strategies that you can start using in your classes to learn information. We'll have this recording posted shortly, within a couple of days. You should have the recording. So if there's anything you want to review or look at again. Yes, Melissa, good point. Yeah, it'll also be available in YouTube so that you can find it there as well. Great. Well, thank you all so much for making the time for this today. It was a joy to think about the science behind learning and strategies we can use to improve our learning together and talk about this with you. Be sure to take advantage of other offerings like this. Come to the Academic Success Center, drop into Learning for Success. We're looking forward to helping however we can. So enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.